Subscribe to the History Monuments channel now, because what you're about to hear is not folklore, not myth, and not cinematic exaggeration, but a real defensive method used during the Second World War that modern homeowners almost never consider, yet criminals still fear when they encounter it unexpectedly. During World War II, civilians across Britain, occupied Europe, and parts of the United States faced a problem modern security systems rarely address properly. Intruders were not always thieves. They were scouts, saboteurs, deserters, or hostile agents trained to bypass locks and alarms. Governments quickly realized that waiting until someone reached the door was already too late. The solution was deceptively simple and brutally effective. Deny stealth before contact by turning the ground itself into an alarm system. Why wartime planners focused on stopping intruders long before entry. Civil defense manuals from the early 1940s repeatedly emphasized that most successful intrusions relied on silence and darkness. Blackout conditions removed street lighting, and many homes had no electricity at night. Instead of reinforcing doors alone, households were instructed to control the approach routes to their buildings. The goal was not confrontation. The goal was early detection. If an intruder could not move quietly, they could not move safely. That principle shaped one of the most effective home defense measures of the era. So, here's the thing. Controlled approach surfaces actually took the place of modern alarms, you know. Homes that were close to factories, rail depots and ports, well, they were advised to modify every path leading toward their entrances. Gravel, rather than soil or grass, was deliberately chosen because, honestly, it amplified the sound of foot movement in the quiet. Broken slate, clinker, crushed brick and coarse gravel. These were carefully laid in strips around windows, doors, and all the usual approach angles. And, well, these materials were never meant to be decorative. They produced an unmistakable sound, even if someone tried to move cautiously. The moment a person stepped onto that ground, their presence was announced instantly. To apply this today, the principle really hasn't changed at all. If you create a 2-meter perimeter of loose angular material around vulnerable entry points, movement simply can't occur silently. The size and irregularity of the stones, that's what matters. Smooth pebbles, they just won't do the trick. It's those angular fragments that shift, scrape and grind under pressure. Wartime guidance even recommended testing the surface at night with bare feet just to be sure you could hear it. And honestly, that same test still works. You know, darkness wasn't always something to be feared. Sometimes it was deliberately weaponized. These days, modern security depends a great deal on keeping things well lit. But back during World War II, the thinking was quite the opposite. Blackout conditions meant folks had to train themselves to listen, not just look. Windows were sealed up tight with blackout curtains, and, well, folks kept the lights inside dim to avoid casting any silhouettes. Without lights outside, every little sound travelled so much farther. Things like gravel paths, strips of tin hanging up, metal edging in the garden, or even a bit of loose fencing wire. These all created unique sound signatures that really cut through the silence of the night. These days, a smart approach is to control how much light spills out from your home. For example, exterior motion lights can be aimed inward instead of outward, so they light up the inside thresholds when triggered, rather than blinding the people inside. It's a bit like the old wartime thinking. Keep your night vision sharp and make the intruder give themselves away by the sounds they make. How layered noise traps created psychological deterrence. Civil defence planners understood that intruders abandoned attempts when uncertainty rose. Homes often combined gravel with secondary sound triggers such as loosely hung gates, unlatched wooden shutters, or stacked firewood near entry routes. These were not traps intended to injure. They were warning systems designed to remove control from the intruder. Applying this today can be as simple as placing lightweight obstacles near entry paths that shift when brushed. Wooden trellises, stacked planters, or metal garden edging placed deliberately loose will create unexpected noise even under slow movement. The key is unpredictability. A burglar expects locks. They do not expect the ground itself to betray them. So, during World War II, defenders often avoided direct confrontation and instead relied on what was called a time advantage. The point of these measures, you see, was never about heroics or bravado. Civilians were told quite plainly. Detection buys time, and time, well, it saves lives. Once any movement was detected, households were, instructed to retreat to their safe rooms, signal their neighbours, or alert the local wardens. The intruder, now exposed and a bit unsure, would often just withdraw without things escalating further. For modern homes, this really just means pairing early detection with straightforward response plans. It's all about knowing where you'll retreat, who you'll alert, and how you'll communicate. These things matter far more than any kind of confrontation. A barking dog, for instance, was seen as just an extension of the system, not the system itself. Dogs would react to sound triggers that had already been set off by those approach surfaces, So, you might be wondering why this method still works against modern criminals. Well, despite all the advances in technology, criminals still, rely on silence and speed to get what they want. Cameras, sure, they record events, but they rarely stop them from happening in the first place. Alarms they usually only activate after entry. The World War II approach, though, it denies stealth entirely. An intruder forced to make noise before reaching the structure loses initiative and confidence. This psychological shift is often enough to abort the attempt. Modern examples of this principle succeeding appear in rural properties, off-grid homes and heritage sites that maintain gravel approaches. Incidents frequently end at the perimeter, not the door. The method requires no power, no subscription, and no electronics to fail. How this knowledge preserves both history and safety. Understanding this technique is not about nostalgia. It is about recognizing that wartime solutions were born from necessity, observation, and repeated field experience. These were not theories. They were tested nightly under real threat. Subscribe to History Monuments. Share this with fellow history enthusiasts and survival-minded viewers, and help preserve the practical wisdom that protected ordinary people during extraordinary times. This channel exists to ensure that proven knowledge is not lost to modern complacency, and your support keeps these lessons alive.